Marcus had always prided himself on being a rational man. At 32, he was a software engineer who dealt in logic, algorithms, and concrete solutions. Ghosts, monsters, and things that went bump in the night were relics of childhood fears he'd long since abandoned. That confidence would prove to be his undoing on the night of October 13th, when he picked up a passenger that would change everything he thought he knew about reality. The evening had started normally enough. Marcus drove for a rideshare company on weekends to supplement his income, navigating the familiar streets of downtown Portland as rain drummed steadily against his windshield. The city's neon lights reflected in wet pavement, creating an impressionist painting of urban life that he'd grown accustomed to over the past 2 years. His phone chimed with a pickup request at 11:47 p.m. The location was unusual, a defunct cemetery on the outskirts of the city that had been closed for renovations for the past 6 months. Marcus frowned at his phone screen, assuming it was a GPS error. Passengers sometimes got confused about their exact location, especially late at night after a few drinks. He'd driven to stranger places before. The cemetery gate stood open, hanging crooked on rusted hinges. Strange, he thought, considering. The place was supposed to be sealed off. His headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating weathered headstones and overgrown paths. The rain had intensified, turning the cemetery grounds into a muddy maze of puddles and shadows. He pulled up to the coordinates and waited, engine idling, windshield wipers maintaining their rhythmic beat. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Marcus was about to cancel the ride when a figure emerged from behind a large mausoleum about 50 yards away. The person moved with an odd, shuffling gait, wearing a hooded sweatshirt that obscured their face. Even from a distance, something seemed off about the way they walked. Too slow, too deliberate, as if each step required enormous effort. Marcus rolled down his window slightly. "Hey, you call for a ride?" he shouted over the rain. The figure raised a hand in acknowledgement and began moving toward the car. As they drew closer, Marcus felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine. The passenger's movement seemed wrong somehow, like a marionette being controlled by an amateur puppeteer. When they reached the back door, Marcus caught a glimpse of pale, almost translucent skin beneath the hood. "Where to?" Marcus asked as the passenger slid into the back seat. "Home," came the reply, a voice barely above a whisper, dry as autumn leaves. "Just drive." Marcus glanced in his rearview mirror but couldn't make out the passenger's face in the darkness. The hood was pulled low, casting deep shadows. "Need an address, buddy. GPS doesn't work with home." "North," the voice said. "I'll tell you when to turn." This wasn't the first time Marcus had dealt with a vague passenger, usually someone too intoxicated to remember their exact address. He put the car in drive and headed toward the cemetery exit, assuming clearer directions would come once they reached the main road. As they left the cemetery grounds, Marcus tried to make conversation. "Rough night to be out walking around? What were you doing in there anyway? Place is supposed to be closed." Silence. Marcus glanced in the mirror again. The passenger sat unnaturally still, hands folded in their lap, head tilted slightly to one side. The only sound was the rain against the windows and the steady hum of the engine. "Turn left," the voice said suddenly as they approached an intersection. Marcus obliged, steering onto a tree-lined road he'd never traveled before. The streetlights here were older, casting weak yellow pools of light that seemed to emphasize the darkness between them, rather than illuminate it. Houses became sparse, giving way to dense woods on either side. "So, you live out here?" Marcus asked, trying to fill the oppressive silence. "Pretty isolated." "I used to," came the whispered reply. The phrasing struck Marcus as odd, but before he could ask for clarification, the passenger spoke again. "Right at the next road." They turned onto what could barely be called a road, more like a dirt path that wound deeper into the woods. Marcus's car bounced over ruts and potholes, branches, scraping against the windows. His GPS had lost signal completely, showing only a blank gray screen. "Look, I don't think this is safe," Marcus said, slowing the car. "Maybe I should turn around and take you back to town. You can call someone to pick you up. Keep driving." There was something in the voice now, an edge that made Marcus's hands tighten on the steering wheel. He told himself he was being paranoid, that the passenger was probably just someone who lived in a remote cabin, but every instinct screamed at him to stop the car and demand answers. The path ahead curved sharply to the right. As Marcus navigated the turn, his headlights swept across something that made his blood freeze. Standing among the trees, not 20 feet from the road, was another figure. This one was also hooded, also pale, and also completely motionless. "Did you see that?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking slightly. "See what?" Marcus looked back, but the figure was gone. He must have imagined it. Shadows playing tricks in the darkness. But as they continued down the winding path, he saw more figures, always at the edge of his vision, always disappearing when he tried to focus on them. Some stood behind trees, others seemed to glide between the trunks, keeping pace with the car. "Turn here," the passenger said. Marcus looked ahead, but saw no turn, just more trees. "Turn where? I don't see." "Here." Suddenly, as if it had materialized from thin air, a narrow gap appeared between two large oaks. Marcus felt his sanity slip a notch. That opening hadn't been there a second ago. He was sure of it. "I don't like this," he said, stopping the car. "I'm turning around." "You can't." Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror and felt his heart stop. Where the road should have been behind them, there was now only an impenetrable wall of trees and darkness. The path they'd just traveled was gone, as if it had never existed. "What the hell?" Marcus whispered. "Drive," the passenger said, and this time the voice carried an unmistakable threat. With trembling hands, Marcus steered the car through the gap between the oaks. The path beyond was even narrower, forcing him to slow to a crawl. Branches scraped against the car's roof and sides, creating an almost musical pattern of scrapes and scratches. The headlights seemed dimmer now, as if the darkness itself was absorbing the light. After what felt like hours, but could have been minutes, the trees began to thin. Marcus's headlights illuminated a clearing ahead, and in the center of that clearing stood a house. It was not a house that belonged to the 21st century. The structure looked like something from a bygone era, a two-story Victorian with a wraparound porch, elaborate gingerbread trim, and tall, narrow windows that stared out like vacant eyes. Paint peeled from its weathered siding, and several shutters hung at odd angles. What struck Marcus most was how the house seemed to exist in perfect condition despite its obvious age and neglect, as if it existed slightly outside of time itself. "Stop here," the passenger said. Marcus pulled the car to a halt about 30 feet from the front porch. Now that they were stationary, he could hear things moving in the woods around them, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, and what sounded almost like whispered conversations just beyond the range of human comprehension. "Okay, we're here," Marcus said, his voice barely steady. "That'll be, He looked at his phone, but the screen was black, dead. "Just whatever you think is fair." The passenger didn't move. "Hey," Marcus said, turning around in his seat. "We're here. This is your stop, right?" For the first time since entering the car, Marcus got a clear look at his passenger's face. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life, however long that might be. The face beneath the hood was indeed pale, but it was the pallor of death, not life. The skin was waxy and translucent, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. The eyes were sunken deep into their sockets, mere black holes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Most horrifying of all was the mouth, or rather the absence of one. Where lips should have been, there was only a thin horizontal line, as if the mouth had been sewn shut long ago. Marcus opened his mouth to scream, but no sound emerged. Terror had stolen his voice, leaving him gasping like a fish out of water. "Thank you for the ride," the thing that was not human said, though its sewn mouth never moved. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, resonating inside Marcus's skull. "I've been waiting so long for someone to take me home." The passenger door opened with a rusty creak, though Marcus never saw the creature move to open it. The thing that had pretended to be human stepped out of the car with that same unnatural puppet-like movement. As it stood upright, Marcus realized it was far taller than it had appeared sitting down, at least 7 feet, with impossibly long arms that hung almost to its knees. "Wait," Marcus called out, finally finding his voice. "What are you? What do you want?" The creature turned back toward the car, tilting its head at an angle that would have broken a human neck. "Want?" it repeated, the word echoing strangely in the still night air. "I wanted to come home, and I wanted you to meet my family." That's when Marcus noticed the other figures emerging from the woods. Dozens of them, all tall and pale, all moving with that same disturbing gait. They surrounded the car silently, their eyeless faces turned toward him with unmistakable hunger. Marcus slammed the car into reverse, but the engine only spun.